Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in life when you realize the applause you've been chasing was never meant to define you. The approval you've been desperate to earn was never the measure of your worth. And the day you stop running after validation, the day you stop bending yourself to be liked, accepted, or approved, is the day something extraordinary happens. You don't become invisible, you become undeniable. Because when you stop chasing validation, you stop performing for the world and start becoming someone the world can't help but respect. Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that the chase they've been on was never for purpose, never for growth, never for meaning. It was for validation, and the difficult truth is that validation is a moving target. The more you run after it, the farther it seems to drift. We grow up believing that approval is the measure of our worth, that applause defines our value, and that the opinions of others determine whether we are enough. But the real turning point arrives the moment we understand that respect isn't something we demand or chase, it's something we attract by who we choose to become. There is a quiet confidence that forms when you shift your attention from impressing others to improving yourself. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't shout, doesn't crave attention, doesn't need to be seen to feel significant. When you stop chasing validation, you begin to move with a different energy. You develop a grounded presence, a steady purpose, a calm certainty about who you are and what you stand for. People notice this, even if you never ask them to. Respect finds its way to those who no longer need to beg for it. Many people spend their lives performing for approval, adjusting their personality like a costume, molding their decisions to match expectations that were never their own. They try to be liked, but in the process, they lose touch with their values, their boundaries, their voice. The truth is, the world doesn't respect people who abandon themselves for acceptance. The world respects those who stand firm in who they are, those who mean what they say, those who act with integrity even when no one is watching. When you stop chasing validation, you start listening to a voice you've ignored for too long, your own. And that voice is powerful. It tells you what matters. It tells you what feels right. It tells you which path aligns with your character, not your ego. And the more you follow that voice, the more your decisions begin to reflect strength instead of insecurity. Suddenly, you find that your worth is no longer measured by reactions but by intentions. Not by applause, but by authenticity. Something remarkable happens when you detach your self-worth from other people's opinions. You become free, free to fail, free to learn, free to grow. You no longer fear judgment because you're no longer performing for approval. Failure becomes a teacher instead of an embarrassment. Growth becomes a mission instead of a competition. You start making choices aligned with meaning rather than popularity. And the people who truly value honesty, depth, and purpose will gravitate toward you naturally. Respect isn't built in moments where you try to appear perfect. It's built in moments where you choose to show up as yourself. It grows when you take responsibility, when you communicate with clarity, when you act with consistency, when you admit your mistakes, when you lead with humility. Respect comes to those who don't need to announce their worth but live in a way that expresses it. You attract respect by choosing character over image. You attract respect by valuing principles more than praise. You attract respect by becoming someone whose actions align with their beliefs. And the moment you stop chasing the world's approval, the right people start recognizing your strength. The right opportunities start aligning with your purpose. The right environment begins to support your growth. And through this shift you discover something profound. You never needed validation to be worthy. You only needed the courage to be yourself. And when you finally step into that version of yourself, the one who no longer bends for approval, you begin to understand why validation was never meant to be chased in the first place. Because validation is borrowed, but self-respect is earned. When you operate from authenticity, you stop trying to convince people of your value and start living it. And that shift creates a different kind of influence, one that doesn't rely on applause but on presence. You begin to notice how much energy you used to waste worrying about what others might think. You remember the conversations where you held back your opinion just to stay agreeable, the opportunities you declined because you feared judgment, the dreams you postponed because you weren't sure how people would react, and suddenly, with a clearer perspective, you realize how much of your life was shaped not by what you believed, but by what you feared. That realization doesn't bring shame, it brings liberation, because now you know better. Now you see the cost of living for approval. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. When you stop chasing validation, something powerful begins to unfold. You reclaim your time, your energy, your identity. You start approaching life with a quieter kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. You walk into rooms without calculating who likes you. You focus instead on who you can serve, who you can uplift, and how you can contribute. People respect the ones who bring value, not noise. Value doesn't come from attention seeking, it comes from intention-driven action. You start to understand that respect is built through consistency, the daily choices you make, the promises you keep, the boundaries you reinforce, the standard you hold yourself to when no one is watching. Respect grows in the quiet decisions, not the loud declarations. And with each consistent choice, your sense of identity becomes clearer. You no longer need external voices to tell you who you are, because your actions speak for you. The moment you detach from validation is the moment you stop rushing. You stop running after fleeting approval and start walking with purpose. This pace is different, steadier, calmer, more focused. You begin to enjoy the process again. You start setting goals not because they will impress others, but because they align with your vision. You begin giving your best effort, not for applause, but for fulfillment. Fulfillment lasts longer than validation ever will. You'll notice that the people who once judged you no longer hold power over you. Their opinions don't sting the way they used to. Their expectations don't weigh you down anymore. Why? Because strength grows when you stop outsourcing your worth. Instead of asking, will they like this? You start asking, is this true to who I am? Instead of chasing acceptance, you begin choosing integrity. That's what draws real respect, not perfection, but truth. And as you rise in authenticity, you attract a different kind of connection. Genuine people recognize genuine energy. They see the way you carry yourself, not with arrogance, but with grounded confidence. They notice your conviction, your clarity, your willingness to stand firm in what you believe even when it's uncomfortable. These are the qualities that inspire trust. These are the qualities that create admiration without you having to ask for it. You also realize that not everyone will like you, and that becomes perfectly acceptable, because liking is optional, but respecting is a response to character. Respect is earned by the way you lead your life, by the courage you show in difficult moments, by the honesty you bring to your decisions, by the consistency of your actions over time. And when you stop chasing the need to be liked by everyone, you become someone who is respected by the right ones. Walking away from validation doesn't make you distant, it makes you honest. It makes your yes mean yes and your no mean no. It strengthens your boundaries, clarifies your priorities, and aligns your choices with your values. You stop living on a stage and start living in your truth. You stop performing and start becoming. And in that becoming, you discover the most empowering realization of all. The person you needed validation from the most was yourself. And once you give yourself that permission to be imperfect, to be growing, to be learning, to be flawed yet worthy, you step into a life not built by others' approval, but by your own authenticity. And authenticity is the beginning of a freedom you were always meant to experience. And as you begin to live from this newfound freedom, you start noticing subtle shifts in the way you move through the world. You no longer walk into situations with the pressure to prove anything. Instead, you bring a calm intention, a clarity that only comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. This clarity becomes your compass, guiding you toward decisions that strengthen your character rather than inflate your image. You begin to trust yourself more, not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you finally trust your ability to learn, adapt, and rise. You start to realize that respect isn't earned in grand public gestures. It's built in the smallest, quietest decisions, the ones no one sees. It's in the discipline to follow through on your commitments, even when they're inconvenient. It's in the humility to admit when you're wrong without letting your ego defend your mistakes. It's in the courage to say no when something goes against your values. These moments shape the person you become far more than any applause ever will. Respect grows out of the sum of these choices, and once you begin to recognize this, you stop seeking approval and start honoring your principles. You feel a shift in your relationships as well. When you no longer need validation, you show up differently. You listen more deeply, speak more honestly, and connect more authentically. You stop tailoring your personality to fit into spaces where you never belonged in the first place. Instead, you begin to attract people who value the real you, not the polished version you once tried to present. These relationships feel lighter, more meaningful, more grounded. They're built on mutual respect rather than superficial acceptance. And for the first time, you experience connection that doesn't drain you, it strengthens you. As you continue walking this path, you become more intentional with your time. You stop chasing every opportunity just to feel recognized. You stop comparing your journey to others because you finally understand that success built on comparison never leads to fulfillment. Instead, you take the time to define what success means for you, not what looks good, but what feels right. You create goals aligned with your inner values, not external expectations. And with each step you take toward those goals, you build a deeper sense of pride, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or validation. The more you live this way, the stronger your internal voice becomes. It begins to override the noise of external criticism, opinions, and expectations. You no longer crumble when someone disagrees with you. You no longer shrink when someone underestimates you. Instead, you hold your ground not with aggression, but with certainty. You understand that your worth doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's perception. You know that criticism doesn't define you unless you choose to internalize it. You recognize that praise doesn't elevate you unless it aligns with your truth. This is where real confidence is born, in the ability to stay grounded regardless of external noise. And as your confidence grows, something remarkable begins to happen. People start turning to you not because you're trying to impress them, but because your authenticity inspires them. They notice your steadiness, they notice your clarity, they notice the way you handle challenges without losing your center. Respect naturally gravitates toward those who lead with integrity. Without trying, you become a source of strength for others, not by demanding admiration, but by consistently showing up as someone who lives their values. You begin to understand that influence is not about persuading others to see your worth. Influence is about living in a way that makes your worth undeniable. When your actions align with your character, when your intentions are rooted in purpose, when your choices reflect genuine conviction, you create a presence that speaks louder than any performance ever could. People may not always agree with you, but they will respect the steadiness of your truth. And in this state, you discover a deeper form of freedom, the freedom to evolve. Without the pressure to maintain a perfect image, you give yourself permission to grow, to make mistakes, to learn openly. You no longer fear missteps because you no longer fear judgment. Growth becomes a natural part of your identity rather than something you pursue only when it looks impressive. You start valuing progress over perfection, purpose over popularity, and authenticity over acceptance. And in doing so, you become someone whose life is led not by the chase for validation, but by the commitment to becoming the strongest, truest version of yourself. And as you continue becoming this truer version of yourself, you begin to notice how your environment responds to your transformation. The world doesn't change overnight, but your relationship with it does. You stop feeling the urge to fit into every space, and instead you start choosing the spaces that allow you to breathe, to grow, to contribute meaningfully. You stop searching for doors to open and start building your own. You no longer walk with the fear of being misunderstood because you've learned that understanding yourself matters far more than being understood by others. You start making decisions with a clarity that surprises even you. You no longer hesitate to set boundaries because you now recognize that boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about protecting the person you are becoming. You begin to notice how much peace comes from saying yes only when you mean it, and how much strength comes from saying no without guilt. The people who respect you adapt to these boundaries, the ones who don't simply fall away, and for the first time you realize that losing people isn't the same as losing yourself. In fact, losing the wrong people is what helps you finally return to who you were meant to be. You become more patient with your own journey. Validation used to make you rush, constantly comparing your pace with others, fearing you were falling behind. But without that pressure, you begin to appreciate the rhythm of your own growth. You start valuing the quiet seasons, the ones without recognition, without applause, without visible progress. Because now you understand that these seasons are where you build the discipline, the resilience, the character that success requires. You stop measuring your progress by how it looks and start measuring it by how it feels, and it feels honest. It feels grounded. It feels real. You begin to recognize how unnecessary the chase for approval truly was. Not because approval is bad, but because chasing it left you disconnected from your own identity. Now, without that chase, you see opportunities differently. You no longer ask, will this impress them? Instead, you ask, will this grow me? You stop looking for shortcuts and start valuing mastery. You stop seeking visibility and start seeking depth. And with each intentional step, your foundation grows stronger than it ever was when you sought validation. You start holding yourself to a different standard, not a harsher one, but a truer one. You begin asking yourself the difficult questions. Am I acting from fear or conviction? Am I choosing comfort or growth? Am I being led by my ego or my purpose? These questions guide you toward choices that reflect who you want to become, not who you used to be. And as your standards rise, your life begins to align with them. The people you attract change. The conversations you engage in change. The opportunities you pursue change. Everything starts to shift because you've shifted. You develop a kind of inner peace that doesn't come from external silence, but from internal alignment. You no longer feel the heaviness of pretending. You no longer carry the burden of worrying whether others approve. You show up in moments without overthinking, without rehearsing, without calculating the right words. Your presence alone carries weight because it's no longer diluted by insecurity. It's grounded in honesty, and people feel that. People trust that. People respect that. And as this newfound steadiness grows within you, you start inspiring others without even trying. They see how you carry yourself not with arrogance, but with a quiet confidence built through self-awareness. They see how you handle challenges without crumbling under pressure. They see how you own your mistakes, grow from them, and return even stronger. Your consistency becomes a form of leadership they're drawn to. Your authenticity becomes a reminder of what is possible when someone stops chasing validation and starts honoring their truth. Your voice becomes clearer. Your decisions become more intentional. Your relationships become more meaningful. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you become someone others look up to, not because you demanded respect, but because you lived in a way that made respect the natural response. People start valuing your thoughts, trusting your judgment, and seeking your presence, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it through character. And through all of this, you begin to understand something profound. When you stop chasing validation, you create the space for genuine respect to find you. Respect that isn't forced, respect that isn't conditional, respect that isn't temporary, respect that comes not from performing, but from becoming. And once you taste that kind of respect, you'll never again feel the need to chase the temporary approval you once thought was everything.